I thought this little lens was going to be the answer to some of my problems, but turns out not so much. But let's talk about it anyway. This is the Sony E16mm f2.8. It's APS-C only. It comes in silver, which is bare metal. It takes a 49mm filter thread. It weighs 65 grams, which is very, very little. And it will close focus to about 24 centimeters. This lens is tiny. It's probably one of the lightest lenses I've ever used anyway. It's certainly the shortest lens I've ever used. So it's APS-C, which means it's going to work on the A6000 series, the A5000 series. Do they do any others? I don't think so. These little guys, the little mirrorless APS-Cs from Sony. The fact that it's APS-C means that 16mm is actually going to look a lot more like 24mm, which is probably second only to 35mm, my favourite focal length. That's a thing that I have, I guess. So this would be true 16mm on a full frame camera. 24 is going to look a little bit more cropped in. Now it looks metal, but I mean, that's just on the outside. The rest of the lens is made of plastic. Metal lens mount though, so sturdy-ish. Fits nicely onto this. Now it came out in 2008, and 2008 was the heyday of the Sony NEX range of cameras. That was before they started putting the alpha in front of the thing. So it's like NEX5, NEX7. They were pretty great cameras by all accounts. I never had one. There's a couple of people who seem to really like them back in the day, and they led to the, things like the A6000, so pretty good. The thing is, back in the NEX days, they didn't have all the autofocus features and things like that in these, so it could fall down on that. It does fall down on that. Spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you about how it falls down. It does have optional lens hood, which I did buy. I got one on eBay for like £1, which makes it look kind of better. It's also able to take a wide angle adapter, which I think makes it about equivalent to a 16mm at full frame, and then a fisheye adapter. I wouldn't bother with those. Just get a natively fisheye lens from like Samyang or something like that if you're gonna get something on a fisheye. I think once you start adapting and adding bits onto the front, nah. So why did I buy this lens 9 years after it was released? Well, I wanted to put together a really tiny little vlogging setup so that I could do some walking around and talking while I was away, traveling. And I wanted something, wide enough to see me, but I wanted a little bit of shallow depth of field. So back a little while ago, I broke the kit lens that came with this, and that's a 16 to 50, I think. And that's a decent lens. The autofocus works really well, really small. Obviously you've got a zoom there as well, so it's kind of handy, and it works with all the autofocus features of this camera, obviously, because it comes with it. So I broke that, and that's annoying. And this camera just kind of sat on the shelf. I didn't really use it, and then I thought, it's a great camera, why is it not getting any use? So I bought this little Rode Video Micro, great little microphone, doesn't need any power, goes really well with this setup. And I needed a lens as well. I needed something that I could kind of, hold out in front of me and get me in a little bit of surroundings. And then I saw that this lens was available. It was something that Sony made. Unfortunately, they've not revamped it at all. And the thing that drew me to it is a prime, and it's tiny, so I thought, it should be relatively sharp. And it's an f2.8, that's the minimum aperture on it, so you get a little bit of a blurry background even when you filming yourself, you've got it wide, whatever. So I bought it, and I've been using it for a couple of months. If you've seen some of my videos in the last couple of months, you will have noticed that I'm out of focus a lot, and that's unfortunate. But one of the other reasons that I got it was because I wanted to test it out, because I see a lot of people who've gone out and bought one of the A5000 series cameras or the A6000 series cameras, the kind of cheaper ones, maybe the A6000, the A5000, and they want a cheap lens for it. They want something that's better than the one that you get with it. I looked at that Sigma 16 1.4, and as much as that is a fantastic lens, it was like 3 or 4 times the price of this. And I was looking at these for people starting out. So let's do a little bit of an overview of the things that I like and dislike about this lens. Overall, it's a little soft. The image from this isn't the sharpest there is. The autofocus speed isn't great either, and the focus ring leaves a lot to be desired. And that's because, as I say, this is from an earlier generation of these cameras. A couple of features are greyed out because of this. Autofocus drive speed and autofocus track sensitivity. And that's because this lens just won't work with those newer features, which is, you know, fair enough. It wasn't working great, but then I realized that I'd turned on something called pre-autofocus, and I turned that off and it worked pretty well, even for pointing at myself. The problem was, if it was changing from something that was really far away to then pointing at my face, it took quite a while to kick in. Also, it seems to only work well with the center autofocus point, which meant that if it was slightly off my face, it wouldn't work. So it doesn't work with the tracking modes, which means that it leaves a little bit to be desired as a vlogging lens, especially when you are pairing it with one of these cameras that doesn't have a flippy outy screen. And that's why in the last couple of videos there's quite a few shots of me where it starts out for the first couple of seconds out of focus, because even when you give it a couple of seconds, it's still got a couple more to go. Sometimes it does actually lock on really quickly and it's fine, which made me consider keeping it. Other thing to consider is there's no OSS, optical steady shot, which is the inbuilt lens stabilization. Another reason I got this was because I wanted something that was super small, super compact to balance on the Crane M2, which is a really tiny gimbal. It's kind of meant for these cameras, but it maxes out with a lot of lenses. I'm gonna have to try it with the 10-18. If it doesn't work with that, I think the gimbal's probably gonna go before the lens goes. On a slightly separate note, the Crane M2 is the first time a gimbal has made any sense for vlogging, for pointing the camera at you and walking along. I've tried it before. I tried it with the Crane 1, the Crane V2. I tried it with a couple of different ones. I tried it with the Ronin S. That was like, it didn't work well. But this little setup on top of the Crane M2, you can hold that out all day. It's so light. So the OSS, the optical steady shot, isn't a deal breaker because it's actually not the greatest stabilization. Having it is a little bit of a bonus, but as I say, with a wide lens, shooting travel videos, most of the time you're shooting in daylight, you're shooting outdoors, that kind of thing. You don't really need it, especially not for stills. Just up the ISO or whatever, you'll be fine. But it does take a little bit of that micro shake out of it, which is handy. This lens is practically silent when autofocusing. I think that might be because sometimes it moves at a glacial rate, but with a microphone on top of the camera and the autofocus going, you can't hear it at all. So I said before, it's pretty soft. The optics in this make for a relatively soft image, and that's probably going to be an issue for a lot of people. But for me, this camera, the Sony a6000 series cameras over sharpen stuff. Even with sharpening turned down in the menus, I still feel like they're over sharp. And so I actually really like the image out of this. I'm a big fan of vintage lenses. I like that kind of softness that you get from them. Like a lens softness, not like a in-camera softness. I don't know, there's a difference. I can't explain it, but you do get a nice kind of like almost more cinematic image from this lens. There is a problem sometimes with that though, and if the light is hitting it wrong, you'll get a really washed out image. The contrast will go and it'll just look pretty awful. That being said, I've not really noticed that with stills, and also if you're shooting in RAW, you've got a lot more control over contrast and things like that once you get it into Lightroom or whatever you're editing in. If you've got one of the Sony APS-C sensors, I would genuinely recommend this lens, especially for stills. But also for video, if you're doing anything like I'm doing now with some, with a locked off shot, and you're going to be talking to the camera for a while, that autofocus is fine enough for that. It doesn't hunt a lot, and you get that nice, slightly blurry background. With this lens that I'm using at the moment, f4 is the best I can do. It's blurry, but it's not very blurry. You're not getting that good separation because of the depth of field. You're getting good separation because the shadow on my face here, and I've got a nice bright background. That's all just window light, but that's where you're getting the separation. With this lens, you'll get a bit more separation due to depth of field, if that makes sense. If it doesn't, go check out my IGTV videos, because I did a basic series, just really, really basic fundamentals of photography on there. Go check those out. Follow me while you're over there as well, that'd be nice. That leads me on to the bad points. It doesn't have image stabilization. It doesn't work well with all of the autofocus features of the newer cameras. It's a little grindy when you're focusing, if you're gonna do manual focusing, and I really don't like the metal look. I think it looks nasty and cheap, and that's not even structural. The rest of it's made out of plastic. I don't know, go out, buy it, try it, sell it on. It's not gonna lose any value from 75 quid. Well, I'm gonna finish on some technical looking samples. So check them out, and I'll see you on another time.